Well, welcome, June. I am Reverend Alice Reid, and I'm so happy to have you here with us today. We are entering a new month, and lots of things are changing. We have a new theme. The theme this month, we move from Holy, Holy Uprising to Our Soul's Call. So we're going to be talking about the soul and how to listen and how to receive guidance and what is this thing called the soul anyway? Most of you who are here probably have an acquaintance with the soul, but let's talk about it for a little bit. What is it that we mean when we say the soul? Rupert Sheldrake, who is an author and a biochemist, talks about the soul as this morphic field, that invisible field that's formative, that moves and underlies all life as we experience it. And he goes on to say that when we're observing the body of an animal or a person who passes through to death, that nothing changes on the physical level. The body still weighs the same. It still looks the same right after death, right after it makes that transition. But there's clearly something missing. There's clearly something absent when we look upon something where life has left it. And what I want to say is that something is the thing that animates life. It's the thing that makes the grass grow. And when it's not present, well, it's really obvious. What I know about this world and my life is, in your life, and what I experience as I observe and witness life moving through our culture and our society, is that it can seem a little relentless sometimes. Like there's a lot going on that we have to pay attention to. There's a lot that's vying for our attention. And depending upon where you are in your life, it can seem like there's an endless tasks and projects that you need to take care of. Things to do and places to get to. And yet, the thing that makes the grass grow, that invisible life force that is present in all life, lives within us. It's invisible, but it animates all the goings-on that we experience as we look around into the world. And so, as we talk about the soul's call, that invisible life force stuff is what we're going to be talking about. Carl Jung said, "Those who look outside dream, and those who look inside awaken." And I take this to mean that the outer expression is but a shadow of the true depth of us as individuals, is the true depth of humanity, that there's something more to life, and that when we're looking outside, we have a sense of things, but it isn't until we look within that we really begin to connect with that which is the livingness, the soul, the spirit that lives within us. I have experienced the soul's call in a faint whisper, a gentle tap maybe, just a barely audible whispering that can hardly be noticed among the din of life and the clattering for my attention. And I have experienced it as kind of like a loud train whistle trying to wake me up. And I like it a lot better when it's gentle. But sometimes I need to be shaken up to wake up. And I have a feeling from the little bit of chuckling in the audience here that you know what I'm talking about. I find that when the soul's call is subtle, when it's quiet, when it's that gentle whisper, it's a little easier for me to ignore. It's a little easier for me to let my attention go from one thing to another thing as opposed to listening to that inner guidance. And I also notice that when I'm ignoring that inner guidance system, if you will, IGS, is that what we'll call it? The inner guidance system. When I'm ignoring that, I can start to notice a little change in my demeanor. I get a little more annoyed or frustrated more easily, right? Does that happen for you guys? I might begin to do a little more projecting as I look out into the world. Maybe I get a little more judgmental. It's harder for me to experience joy because I'm all caught up in things. I'm all caught up in what's going on. I'm all caught up in the next most important thing that I have to do, whatever that have to do is. And gosh, help you if you get in my way. Because I'm on a mission and I'm trying to get something done. And I also notice that as I get too preoccupied with tasks and projects, that fear tends to creep in. Like this feeling of uneasiness and restlessness comes about. And then I start getting even busier if I don't stop and pause and readjust myself. There's one of my favorite quotes from the book of Thomas is saying number 70, and it goes like this. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. What the master teacher Jesus is referring to is the soul. That if we try to squash it, if we try to crowd it out with other things, it will continue to try to get our attention because it's part of who we are. It's not like this separate disembodied thing like a dress we put on or a pair of shoes that we're wearing. It's part of who we are. It's part of the very fiber of our being, and so it has to get our attention somehow. And when I read that quote, what it says to me is that when I'm looking within, when I'm paying attention to that voice within, then I'm going to experience joy and well-being and connectedness, and life's going to flow. But when I am ignoring the soul, when I'm ignoring that voice within, well, life's going to get pretty messy and hairy, and it's not going to be pleasant. And eventually the soul will find a way to get my attention. And the most prominent experience I had with that was back in the late 1990s. I had this great job working for an international organization. We were focused on youth development, and it was a really wonderful place to work and lots of new experiences. And I had an opportunity to get a promotion, and I put myself up for it, and I was indeed promoted to the Chief Operating Officer of our U.S. division. It was quite a feather in my cap, and I was able to begin to work with this amazing visionary who was a leader in youth development in the U.S., and I got to commute from Baltimore to D.C. so that I could be right there where the action was happening. And on a good day, the commute was just over an hour, and if it drizzled a little bit, you were talking 2 hours in the car, very easily. The things at home were a little in disarray. My husband was very ill with Lyme disease, and I had 2 teenagers under roof, and one of them was dealing with depression and self-medicating with drugs and alcohol. And I had this high-pressure, important job that needed all of me. And so I was doing the do, right? I was working. I was doing important work. I was out in the fray of things. And as 2000 rolled into 2001, I found myself with those little characteristics I mentioned earlier. I was easily annoyed and frustrated. I began to get pretty judgmental. That visionary leader that I was working for it was hard to see that brilliance through my judgments and my frustrations. It became a real challenge. And I remember the day when, I had moments when I would kind of get a sense that something was amiss and I wasn't quite on the right track. But I remember the day when a friend of mine who was working in the same organization came to my office and they told me they were going to resign. And then he looked at me and he said, "What about you? You don't seem happy. You've put on all this weight. You're really stressed all the time. Like, are you okay? Are you in the right place?" And I remember thinking something in me heard him, but I was in deep. I was in really deep with this job and being so important out in the world. And it was a Tuesday in September when it all began to fall apart. I was in charge of the office that day, and one of my employees came into my office and told me something terrible had happened. And we all went out into the lobby and turned on the TV as we watched the Twin Towers coming down. And then we heard that there was a plane that had hit the Pentagon, which is not far from where we were. And while I wasn't able to feel my own pain during that time in my life, I could feel that pain. I could feel that global pain of the 9/11 disaster that was happening. And it shook me to my core, and it shook me to such a degree that I was able to wake up. And it took about a month before I actually resigned from that position. And my life began to change its trajectory. I found my way into my very first Science of Mind community. I began to take classes. I began to learn how to intentionally and consciously listen to my soul, to do that deep inner listening, or as Carl Jung was talking about, that looking inside to awaken. And as I took classes, I began to feel a deep sense of gratitude for that opportunity, that when that tragedy happened, it was my opportunity to wake up, and I was grateful that I made that choice at that moment. And I think that's what pain does for us sometimes. It gives us an opportunity to be awake and to be conscious and to make a choice. I like to think sometimes that pain's the soul's last resort. It doesn't necessarily lead with pain. It's just like an illness or a diagnosis, right? We don't pay attention to the little something that's going on with our body until it gets so bad that we finally go to see a doctor, and it turns out that there's something that there were signs all along the way, but it wasn't until we were in great pain that we did something about it. We've all either done that or heard stories about that. And so when we have pain in our life, and we have that disruption and dis-ease that comes up in whatever form, it's an opportunity for us to realize that we haven't been listening, that still small whisper of the soul has begun to be a cry, a yelling, a shaking for us to pay attention and to begin to bring our attention back to that very part of us that we have forgotten about. What I know about pain is that it has opened me up in ways that I couldn't have imagined, and it has led me down pathways that I wouldn't have even noticed if I hadn't been in the moment of being challenged. There's a poem by D.H. Lawrence that I want to share with you that I think talks about that call of the soul and the movement or the dance of the soul with life. And it's called Song of a Man Who Has Come Through. Not I, but the wind that blows through me. A fine wind is blowing the new direction of time. If only I let it bear me, carry me. If only it carry me. If only I am sensitive, subtle, oh, delicate, a winged gift. If only, most lovely of all, I yield myself and am borrowed by the fine, fine wind that takes its course through the chaos of the world, like a fine and exquisite chisel, a wedge blade inserted. If only I am keen and hard like the sheer tip of a wedge, driven by invisible blows, the rock will split. We shall come at the wonder. We shall find the Hesperides. Oh, for the wonder that bubbles into my soul. I would be a good fountain, a good wellhead, would blur no whisper, spoil no expression. But wait, what is knocking? What is knocking at the door in the night? Is it someone who wants to do us harm? No. It is 3 strange angels. Admit them. Admit them. When I read that poem, especially that last section about the 3 strange angels that I think have come to do me harm, I think about this idea of the unexpected in life that comes to us, the things that we try to push away, the things that we do not want to. No, that is not for me, we say. But in this poem, D.H. Lawrence is reminding us that there's something that wants to move through us. And that if we allow the unexpected to come forward, whether it be pain or something we didn't want, that it's all God, like the quote at the beginning of the spiritual practice, that the allness of God inhabits everything that we experience. And if you're experiencing a challenge right now, you're probably not enjoying what I have to say because you're like, wait a minute, this can't be God. It hurts too much. And yet, all of us have been through enough living experiences to know that when we look back on those times in our lives when life seems to have narrowed, when it's gotten challenging, when our hearts have been broken open, when we've lost jobs, when we've lost loved ones, that on the other side of that pain is temporary. It's just one of the mechanisms that can carry us towards the next yet to be. What would happen if we didn't deny or avoid pain, but rather embraced it as this invitation? An invitation to remember who you are and who you've come here to be. What if we could use the shifting of the rock being split open to allow us to walk out into something that we had forgotten, some calling, some longing from within ourselves? Pain is a necessary part of living, and I think there's an art to it as well, because it can feel like the great flood that has come through and swept you off your feet. And yet, as we are practiced in our spiritual practices, as we do our meditation and our prayer, as we do this thing called community with one another, we find ways to keep ourselves buoyed so that when the river does come through, it can be a temporary experience. It can be an experience that we walk out. It can be an experience that is more like the tilling of the soil of a garden and breaking up the clumps of dirt so that something new can grow. This month of June has some great significance in it, and with everything that's been going on in our culture, I think it's even more meaningful. This month is Pride Month, and on June 19th, it's Juneteenth. And what I know about Pride Month is the time to celebrate the opportunity, the availability, and the freedom for people to love who they want to love. And so we celebrate that all month in the month of June. And also on June 19th, that is the commemoration, it's called Juneteenth, and it's the commemoration of the African American culture, when the last state of the Union, Texas, finally acknowledged the abolition and the emancipation proclamation, and that the slaves were free. And so it's a great celebration of freedom all month. So all month I want us to look at those places where we can find our own freedom, where we can acknowledge the struggle and the pain that led to great freedom, and that each one of us can celebrate those freedoms either independently in our own life in the ways that we've walked out pain and oppression, or together as a community and as culture for the LGBTQ community and for African Americans everywhere who are celebrating greater freedom, greater life, greater livingness, greater love. I want to remind you, because if you're in the middle of it, it doesn't feel so much, but I want to remind you that challenge and pain are temporary, and that they always give birth to something new, even if we have to let go of something cherished. And if you're willing to walk through it consciously and allow it to move through you, like the wind in D.H. Lawrence's poem, if you're willing to give it that freedom with your soul and admit them, whatever it is, admit it, allow it, invite it in. And when you let those strange angels come through your life, allow them to lead you back to your soul's call, for it has not moved. The soul does not move. It does not ever get separated from us. It waits patiently, sometimes not so patiently when it's trying to get our attention, but it waits. And so this month, let's continue to turn inward, to look at that soul's call, to look at what it is that wants to be free within us, and to remember that life invisible is a power and a presence that can never be diminished or harmed, and that as we continue to walk out this thing called Centers for Spiritual Living and living life consciously and spiritually, that we will continue to experience newness. We'll continue to be supported. We'll continue to be loved. Thank you very much. Jamie, could you wait? Let's pray, shall we? Just again, turning our attention inward and allowing ourselves to be in that place of our heart, that place where we are one with the one, where we're one with each other, where we're always held up and supported, knowing that power and that presence moves in as and through us, that there is never a time when we simply turn our attention back to that place of oneness, that we are ever disappointed, that we are always reminded of the power and the presence of the one. And so I know this day, as we turn our attention to this soul's call, that each one of us listens for that unique and individuated voice that comes from within, that continues to help us take each step forward. And I trust that as we walk out this soul's calling that is coming forth to help us to remember who we are and who we've come here to be, that each step will be met with presence and support and power and potency, that the heart and the soul working together will bring the mind along, and that as we are totally aligned with this presence and this power, that there is a great opening, an opening of love to receive us, to embrace us, to love us, and for us to love back and to embrace and to receive the seemingly other. So it is this idea and the spirit of oneness that I simply anchor this prayer, and that power and that potency that is calling us forward, knocking on the door. And I know for each one that we open it, we say yes. And so it is. Now, Jamie.